All Part 4, actually, module 4. And module 4, cultural sensitivity versus desensitization. So we've talked some about sensitization and desensitization. What is it? Sensitivity is the capacity to respond to stimuli. And so that is that word again, capacity. In order for us to have the capacity to respond to stimuli, we need resources and readiness to give us the capacity that we need to be sensitive. The degree to which the receiver responds to incoming information. Sensitization, the quality or condition of responding to certain stimuli in a sensitive manner. So cultural sensitivity, when we combine the word cultural or culture with sensitivity, is the capacity to respond effectively to stimuli outside of one's own cultural beliefs and values. And so again, we set our prism aside, we set our beliefs and our values aside so that we can proceed forward with the, and part of having the capacity to do that is to be willing to set our, how we see things, our beliefs, our values aside so that we can be sensitive to others, empathize with others. The ability to experience empathy, to value and to seek to understand the cultural perspectives of others. And also cultural sensitivity is to realize that one's own culture and cultural beliefs are not superior to that of others. And at the point that we, we talked about American culture and that superiority, that sense of superiority is the opposite of cultural humility. And so we want to become culturally humble so that we can perceive and understand. Excuse me. The culture of others. Desensitization and a subjective point of view. Subjective point of view is a point of view, a subjective point of view is a point of view subject to the filter of one's experiences, opinions rather than the facts. If we drew our conclusion without our own opinions, it would be an objective point of view because we would be basing it on facts and not opinions or experiences. So a subjective point of view is what we do when we filter others' experiences or what we're experiencing with others through our prism that was developed through our experiences and the opinions that we formed as a result of it. Stereotyping is cultural incapacity. It is a preconceived idea that attributes to certain characteristics in general to all the members of a class or a set of people. And we saw that in the example of the nurse who had formed her opinion about Latino people and decided that this client, this patient was not in real need of pain medication. A bias, we have to watch our biases because we have them. A personal preference, a like or a dislike, we have them, but we can't afford to let them influence our interaction with others, especially when the tendency interferes with the ability to be partial, unprejudiced, or objective. And then there are those well-meaning statements, damaging statements with well-meaning intentions. And this oftentimes comes from a place of cultural blindness. iatrogenic behaviors is what that is. And we're going to talk more about iatrogenic behaviors as we move forward in the training. When we talk about being desensitized or desensitization, it's the diminished emotional responsiveness to situations after repeated exposure to it, causing lack of sensitivity to the feelings and needs of others. And how it happens is it occurs when an emotional response, when we first came into the field, we may have been gung-ho, and just excited about how we were going to change lives and save lives and change the world. And we had this emotional response, and we've repeated this emotional response to situations and actions on the part of our clients, and found it to be ineffective. In other words, we put forth all this effort and they relapsed anyway. We put forth all this effort and they still didn't get it. And after a while, we can become desensitized, where we feel like just another day, another dollar, and it's not gonna make no difference, no way. So I'm not gonna put forth that effort. And we become numb to the needs of others, to the feelings of others. We become numb and we lack sensitivity. Some of the signs are complacency, a feeling of quiet pleasure or security in and of where we are ourselves and not concerned with the feelings and needs of others. Often while unaware of or unconcerned with unpleasant realities or harmful possibilities, where we've got a self-satisfaction. I'm okay, bunk the rest of what's going on. I'm okay, and I'm just gonna take care of me. If I don't take care of me, ain't nobody else gonna take care of me. And and can develop an attitude that there's no room for in the field that we work in, because we're helpers and we're in this field to provide help to others. And so when we see signs of desensitization, it's our responsibility to check them. Another sign of desensitization is lack of respect, disrespect, that lack of courtesy or courteous regard, a rudeness. We saw that with the secretary, the receptionist in the video. She was rude, perhaps she was at a stage of burnout. The impact on staff's communication. When we talk about desensitization, it will impact our ability to communicate with clients and coworkers. And all of this desensitization and all of these signs are a result of burnout. So how many of you have actually experienced burnout?
I have.
I have.
Oh yeah.
I have.
Okay. How did you know? How did you come to a place of knowing that what I guess, John, I'm gonna ask you first. What was your awareness? What was your telltale sign that said, I must be in burnout?
Because it doesn't sit well inside my gut. I know why I do what I do. I'm a peer recovery coach.
Okay.
So, I know what made me get into peer recovery coaching, and I'm also in long-term recovery. And the thing of it was it wasn't sitting. My whole reason for getting into it, it just didn't feel right at the end of the day. It felt like I was just, oh my God, how much more can these guys honestly drain me? and how do you, and then you fight through it and you press through it because you ultimately want to do what's right for the clients that you're working with.
Yeah.
My situation was a little bit extreme. My caseload got ridiculous, and I don't think I knew what I was getting into when I first came into it. And the next thing I know, I've got 46 clients that I'm working with. at every level of recovery. So I just don't think mentally I came into it prepared to be able to hit that. And when I did hit that feeling, I was like, oh my God, what did I do? And how do I get out of this? It's not a comfortable feeling. I've got 17 years recovery this year. And I only throw that out there because I think this right here is a major thing that you have to focus on, because you have to be right in order to be able to help everybody else. So I think that was my challenge was, oh my God, this is really uncomfortable and I don't like this. And I need to press through it correctly.
When you said this is uncomfortable and I don't like this, you referring to the feelings of burnout?
Yeah. I mean, I don't, especially when you're playing with, clients that, you're getting phone calls at 1 o'clock in the morning with people that are suicidal or I mean, we deal with some very high profile, high feeling people at their worst and at their best. And yeah. I think having been thrown that amount of people early on in this field, the feeling of uncomfortableness was like, oh my God, I don't want to feel like I don't want to be there for the person, but I have the right set of mind to be able to take that call. When you're looking at your phone and you're like, oh God, him again or her again, or whatever the case may be, you don't want it to get like that. It's just like I didn't get in it to be to that level. So it's super important. So I learned a very early lesson. Learn how to say no, learn how to balance, learn boundaries, those types of things, and understand the reason why I got into this field. And it's not it's not to get to a point to where you can't help somebody. You have to be at the right state of mind.
Yeah. And one of the trainings I do is put the mask on yourself first.
True that.
And that, I'm telling you, I'm a substance abuse professional, but predominantly what I do now is training, but I'm also a minister. And I do some individual sessions, some individual spiritual guidance sessions. And so I have a caseload in that regard. And I've learned that people, when they're in need, see, because as a substance abuse counselor, there were boundaries that were set in place by the organizations that I worked for, because we couldn't give clients phone numbers and there were no recovery coaches yet. When I worked in residential treatment and even outpatient treatment, there were no recovery coaches. I now have a recovery coach certification as well. But the boundaries are different for recovery coaches than for clinicians. And the individuals have to set those boundaries for themselves and then be willing to adhere to them so that you don't burn out and at the desire to help others risk your own life, your own recovery, your own physical well-being. And I see some comments in the chat. I see Erin said, I didn't have the energy to take care of yourself. Of herself. So when you realized at that point, you realized you were in a stage of burnout. What did you do, John? I'm assuming you began to set some boundaries and able to say no, not only to the client at the 2 o'clock in the morning call, but also to the taking on of so many clients.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but you learn your balance. You learn what's healthy, and you learn what is, I think part of our nature, the reason we wouldn't be in this business if we didn't care about individuals.
Yeah.
But I learned early on in my recovery, if I'm not right, nothing else is going to be right in my life. So you have to start with that. But yeah, you learn you learn the plate analogy. Once my plate starts getting full and it starts teetering, it's like, okay, time to set something off of it, figure out how to balance it back out. And
Yeah. Before you crash and burn,
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And I was a cocaine user, so stimulants, like, I found that I had to watch out. Not only, when I take on a great load, then I need more energy. So then now, is it the go-to to the Red Bull, to the energy drinks, or am I going to cut back on all that I do so that I can rest and not overextend myself? But I see some comments in the chat, and Erin said that she didn't have the energy to take care of herself, which had been a priority. The thought of getting up to go to work seemed completely dreadful, and she put no energy into them. Erin, did you mean you put no energy into the clients?
Yeah, and I had no energy to like usually with my clients, I spend a lot of time focusing on them when I'm with them. And when I was with them, I was just kind of checked out, just kind of blank. Just because I hated everything about being there and working with them at that point. So I had to talk to, I was at a CMH at that time. I had to talk to my supervisors and figure out a way to cut back on the amount of people I was seeing, and particularly who I was working with at that time. I was just working with a lot of people that didn't work well with me. So it was a process. It was a transitional process for me and for them, but it ended up working out for the best. But yeah, that was a hard period that lasted definitely 4 months of just feeling really stuck.
Okay. Nicole said, it's so difficult to maintain a healthy me while working 40 hours, getting my CADC degree, maintaining a home, 4 children, and all their activities, working my recovery, etc. I have to remember to make time for the things that I need. And I got tired just looking at all that you do. I mean, but that's our life for most of us. We have a wide range of things that we're juggling. And somehow self seems to get put on the back burner, but we can't afford it. We cannot afford to put self on the back burner. At some point, somewhere, you want to scale back. I think what may be helpful, though, is to be able to do your trainings via Zoom, as opposed to having to go somewhere and be in person. So that you at home, you can multitask.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Hopefully, even after COVID, we'll still be able to get face-to-face credit for online for Zoom trainings, because I think I know it works well for me as far as a facilitator, and to get my hours from others that I need to maintain my certification. Tassie said, I disassociated my emotions and empathy from my work, and feeling like my mental health was breaking down because I took work home. And you saying theoretically, so you're not saying you took the files home, you're saying you took it all home in your head.
Yep. After a certain amount of time with a 40 patient caseload, 4 groups a week. Some of them were IOP, a women's group, covering other groups, taking on youth patients, and not having necessarily the most supportive upper echelon, if you will. Sometimes I had an hour drive back and forth to work. So that hour drive allowed me to process a lot of things. But then I would get home and I just couldn't stop thinking about, I didn't do this. I need to do that. What about this person? Oh, I need to schedule that person. And it was really just kind of in my head. And then I started to go, you're failing. You're not good enough. And those kind of things. And that's when I just when I would sit with people, I found myself kind of being very blank. And I didn't feel like I was investing as much into the patients as they were investing into treatment. And I was always kind of like, I will work as hard as you do, and we will be able to get through this together. But for some reason, all of a sudden, I just kind of felt like this, kind of, if, Santa threw axe at me, I would be like, oh, okay. There wouldn't be any like response. I'd be like, oh, okay, so that's what we're doing today. And so that's when I decided that I had some serious burnout, and that I really needed to take a step back and evaluate what I could and couldn't do, and kind of set those healthy boundaries with the agency I worked with.
That's good. That's good, before you get to a stage of crash and burn. Some of the thinking that goes along with our thinking when we're headed toward burnout, that first one, number one, dichotomous thinking is, one end of the pendulum or the other. It's either all good or all horrible, and not being able to find the balance in between. Overgeneralization, drawing a conclusion that is more general than the supporting evidence. And so, you touched on it when, Tessie, when you said you felt kind of blank. It's like, just kind of lumping everything together. And then there's jumping to conclusions, so that we're not culturally sensitive. We're not listening to what's being said, but we're jumping to conclusions and assuming that what we think the client needs, or where we think the client is where the client is. Emotional reasoning, where we are reasoning the situations that we're faced with and dealing with on an emotional level, and not a clinical perspective. And then labeling and mislabeling, where we begin to identify our clients as our 6 a.m. 10 a.m. depressive. Here they come again. We putting people in categories, and then personalizing, where we begin to take everything personal. And in this field, we cannot afford to take it personal when our clients succeed or not. We cannot afford to take it personal. So to counteract desensitization, one of the things that we can do is maintain a respectful and inclusive mindset. Have you ever reached a place where not only are you irritated and shutting down where the clients are concerned, but you are just so irritated at coworkers? It's like, I'm doing this, they're not, I'm going over and above, they're not. And so here we want to look at being all inclusive, including everything or everyone, and being respectful, valuing what other people bring to the table, and as opposed to allowing ourselves to label them and put them in a category, and then beginning to feel superior, and wearing a badge of superiority to the point that now I got to prove that I'm superior. So I'm doing all of this stuff. And maybe I'm not trying to prove it to others. Maybe I'm just trying to prove to myself that I'm successful, basing my success on what I do and not who I am. So when we talk of respect, a feeling of deep admiration for someone or something elicited by their abilities, qualities, or achievements, a feeling of deep admiration for someone, or appreciation, maybe even. I might not admire, but I may appreciate this person because of their abilities, their qualities, their achievements, and not necessarily always their attitude is something that I can appreciate, but I still look at them as a valuable individual. Recognize the unique skills and experiences of all individuals. encourage, build people up rather than tear them down. And, you know, if you can't say something nice, maybe just not saying anything at all would be better for them and for you, because once we start on that negative role of putting people down, it has a negative impact on us. Surrender the need to always be right. P, perspectives of all are valid. And just remembering that even though it might not sound valid or important, and we're talking about now with the client too, it's valid and important to them. And so we don't want to be dismissive. We're trying to counteract desensitization. Engage in active listening. Because, you know, our caseloads are such oftentimes that we're not actively listening. We're waiting for them to stop talking so we can say the next thing, and maybe even hurry the session along, get to the end of it because you know what you got waiting on you. And so we want to focus on engaging in active listening, and then circumvent discriminatory or intolerant behavior. You know, even when it's brought to you by another coworker, you know, realizing that negativity causes a dis-ease in your own spirit. And so we want to circumvent negativity and discriminatory or intolerant behavior, not jump in and become a part of it. And T, thoroughly trust that everyone has something to contribute. So that's the acronym RESPECT. Recognize, encourage, surrender, perspective, engage, circumvent, and thoroughly trust. When we talk about boundary crossing and burnout, as professionals, we must be aware of our tendency to navigate the experiences of others through the lenses of our own prism. And we've been talking about that all morning. Internal and external influences of boundary crossing and boundary violation. We can look at intrapersonal, emotional, physical experiences, including trauma. So we're looking at what's in our prism. Have we had some trauma that needs to be addressed? Because if we have not addressed our own trauma, our clients' trauma, we can experience secondary trauma. Interpersonal, when our interpersonal boundary is violated, where we look at the professional and the client relationship, we want to be careful to maintain boundaries so that there's no crossing of the boundary in the interprofessional relationship. I think about recovery coaches when I look at this because the boundary lines are not so clear when dealing with clients because of the peer-to-peer relationship. And so that's an area where you want to really be careful. So we're looking at interpersonal, we're looking at intrapersonal, and then administration. In the administration or the organizational perspective, professionals' relationship with the administration of the organization can be very toxic if there's toxicity at the helm of the ship. And I've experienced that on more than one occasion. I think the easiest relationship is the client, the professional client relationship, as long as I maintain boundaries and don't allow it to overwhelm me and creep into my intrapersonal relationship with myself, with my emotions, my physical experiences, and not allow it to become traumatic. You know, carrying my clients' issues in my head is something I learned early on. I couldn't take it home. I had to leave it on the paper that I wrote it on, and in the office that they spoke it into, or in the group setting, I had to leave it there and come home and go back and pick it up where I left off the next day, because otherwise I would not have been able to function. And the reason, when I realized my caseload was too heavy as a counselor in residential treatment, I went to the director and I explained to her, based on the contract that we had with the state, that my caseload was 3 people more than it should be. And she, in essence, told me, handle it. And I realized that I couldn't, that I could not give my clients what they needed. And that's why there was a limit on how many clients we could have or should have, because clearly it had been established that you were only going to be able to handle so many at a time. And I could not give my clients my best. I could not give them what they deserved, because I was burning out. I was burning out as a result of having too many clients. And when the establishment wouldn't address it, I quit. I resigned and I moved on, because it was either them or me. You know, either I was going to go through all this to make the agency look good or make money, but not give the client what the clients deserved, and burn out in the or burn out in the process of trying to make it happen. So we have to process our emotions. We have to process our emotional and physical experiences, and how it's affecting us, acknowledging how it's affecting us, and then how it may be affecting others, because, you know, many have gotten divorces, and so many other traumatic things happen as a result of burnout, and, you know, taking that out on other people around us. So consider the following to assist in drawing boundary lines and avoiding harm to self and clients. I said we were going to talk about iatrogenic behaviors, and so we will, and then fiduciary, multi-party vulnerability, and boundary management. Iatrogenic behaviors means that an action taken, possibly with the best of intentions to help someone, actually resulted in injury, although unintended. For instance, when we talk about the client, the interpersonal relationship with the professional and the client, and getting too, allowing that relationship to become too enmeshed, so that there are no boundaries between, especially for those of us that work in the field and are in recovery. And I'm gonna go back to you, John, because you talked about that. You talked about how, you know, as a peer recovery, you went into it with one mindset, but you quickly found that you became overwhelmed, and your initial reason for being peer recovery was being sideswiped by the burnout. But how difficult have you found it to be to keep a boundary between going over and above to help someone in recovery as a peer, and it filter over into a personal interaction, because your peers in recovery, probably before, with 17 years, probably before you became a peer support specialist?
Correct. You're asking how did I discover the boundaries?
Yeah, because when we talk about iatrogenic, we can enable, and I guess that's what I'm alluding to. We can enable because we want to be so helpful and cause the boundary lines to blur.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a couple. It's a learning curve, and it's kind of like our recovery. When it becomes painful enough, we'll change. So I learned that early on when it became so painful. So to answer that question, you know, you want to step in and you know, I've studied, you know, you think about the Al-Anon procedures and dealing with parents, and the parents are going through trying to do all the right things because they love and they care for their family, and they don't want to get hurt and things like that. And you think about that, and in my recovery, some of these things, when you step in and soften the bottom for them, you create it prolongs the recovery process.
Yeah.
And you know, you just pray that nothing bad happens as you're learning through that process. But some of my people that I work with, some of the clients that I work with, I had to let them sit on some painful situations, and you sit back going, oh my God, like,
yes, it's like,
yeah, you know, I don't believe I'm having to do this. And you, a perfect example, if you don't mind me using it, I think one of the most valuable lessons that I learned is, I had a guy that a gentleman that I got into treatment. Him and his girlfriend went into treatment, and they went out of state. And he got in, or she got into treatment, and he was unable to get into treatment because they got there late, so they refused him. So he took her car and hopped in it with no driver's license, not her car, went and boosted one last time, ended up in a car accident out of state. And at 1-2 o'clock in the morning, I'm thinking I'm hearing this guy's last breath, and talking to him on the phone, and you can't reach him, and you're trying to figure out how what can I do? How can I call the police department where he's at? And and the only thing that I could do, the guy was 3.5 hours away. Powerlessness. There was nothing that I could have did for this guy. Nothing. And the only thing I did was I said, get to a hospital. Like, that's it. That's the only thing that I've got right now. Get to a hospital. We'll navigate it in the morning. And, you know, 8:30, 9 o'clock the next morning, you know, after I finally was able to get to bed, you know, because your adrenaline's cranked up. And after I prayed, and I'm like, God, just keep him safe. Keep him alive till in the morning, and I'm good. And 8:30 the next morning, you know, I get a call, and it's him. And, you know, I couldn't do anything. My first initial response was hop in my car and drive 3 hours at 3 o'clock, which is insane.
Yeah.
so, you know, some of these things, and then, you know, I had to let that play out how it played out. I couldn't save him from the consequences of a hit and run. Couldn't save him from the consequences of not making it there I couldn't save any of those consequences. And I said, man, we'll just navigate this as we go through it, you know? And so, yeah, I mean, you have to be able to separate and let them hit the bottom that they go to without cushioning it, and just be there for them when they do hit it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. So right in line with that, we must be vigilant to quickly weed out words and actions said and done. And in your case, it would have been what you did to try to get to him, to fix him, to cushion his fall, with good intentions. But would it have been more harmful? You know, did he get the lesson? I hope he got the lesson, you know, through what he had to go through. And then the potential for harm also underscores the importance of getting guidance, you know, from other professionals and from our supervisor. Fiduciary is a term describing relationships in which one person has assumed a special duty and obligation for the care of another. It's not a relationship of equal power. And, you know, we don't want to think we're better than anybody, but we do want to recognize the weight of responsibility that falls on us as professionals, and that we are not in a relationship of equal power. Even if we don't feel powerful, how our clients see us may very well be that they see us in a powerful position. And so a fiduciary relationship implies that one person in the relationship enters with an increased vulnerability, requiring the objectivity, support, and protection of the other person. And these relationships are held to a higher level of obligation and duty than friendships and are not reciprocal in nature. And so when we interact with our clients, we need to keep that in mind. When we talk about multi-party vulnerability, this is a phrase that conveys how multiple parties can be injured by what a professional does or fails to do. These parties include the person receiving services, that person's family and intimate social network, the professional, the profession, the organization for which the professional is working, and the community at large. These are some of the parties that can be affected by our interaction with the client. And then boundary management. This encompasses the decision that increase or decrease intimacy within a relationship. If we, the boundary, there's a boundary continuum or intimacy continuum. And so erring on the side of caution is has worked well for me. I choose to err on the side of caution rather than to take risk and get in further than I should be, only to find that it's, though it was with good intentions, it has harmful effects, maybe on the relationship between the professional and the client, but also maybe on the client jumping to some conclusions about my degree of intimacy with them that is not healthy for them. And maybe that's not what I intended, but that's what they picked up. And so remembering that it's a fiduciary relationship and that it's not of equal power is vitally important. We could view the relationship again as a intimacy continuum between the professional and the client, where there is a zone of safety where certain things are okay, but they don't violate ethics. And then a zone of vulnerability in which actions are sometimes, see, this is where we get in trouble, where actions are sometimes okay and sometimes not okay. How do you make that determination? And so those situations really should be handled as never okay. A zone of abuse in which actions are never okay. Not saying it would be abuse, but it could go wrong. And so it would never be okay. One example might be for clinicians. It's generally not practiced that clinicians are expected or allowed to transport clients. And I say clinicians because I know sometimes in some states or cities that the recovery coaches do transport. But generally for clinicians, it's not so. And so this particular day, it's snowing like crazy. And you pick this client up, the buses are not running. You pick this client up because you're fearful for their health out in this weather. And the buses have stopped running. You pass by, you see this client, you pick them up, and then you take them to their destination and everything seems okay until you get accused of something that you didn't do, and so that picking that client up was not the option. The option would have been calling for them to get into a shelter, calling, the 1-800 shelter number, something to get them to safety, but certainly not putting them in your vehicle. Or you pick them up and have an accident and they get hurt in your vehicle, And so there's some things that should never be okay. Maintain the boundary. So here's some of the do's, don'ts, and maybes that we've talked about and some we have not talked about. Gift giving according to policy. Accepting gifts, same thing, according to policy. And for me, even if the policy says that I can, my personal preference is that I not accept gifts, no matter how small they are, unless it's something that the client made in therapy. And, it's, I don't know. I think we have to use our judgment. If the agency says you can accept gifts, then using your judgment as to what you will accept is very important. But I think that when we do that, we get into some clients' gifts are acceptable and some clients' gifts are over the top and we don't accept them. And then it's like, well, why you accept his gift and you didn't accept mine? And so we want to be careful of that. We don't lend money. That's a don't. Borrowing or accepting money from the client, a don't. Giving a hug, let's talk about that. Giving hugs.
No,
Any comments on that?
no.
Carolyn, did you have a comment on giving hugs?
I know, I don't believe in giving hugs.
Okay. I'm a hugger because I come from, a 12-step background, but not with clients. Not with clients. That's a boundary crossing for me.
Because
Any other perspective on that?
Some of it depends on the culture, but because some cultures, if they, having lived overseas, not every culture, especially specific Asian cultures, it's not appropriate. So I think it just depends on not just for ourselves, but for the client.
Remember, this is our relationship with our clients, our fiduciary relationships. And so it's not of equal power. And a hug between a client and a professional is not of equal.
right.
We're not on level ground. And so that hug, remember, the client has issues. That's why they're in therapy. And that hug might very well represent something that you didn't intend for it to represent.
I worked in anti-trafficking in Cambodia, and so I would totally echo what you said, Pamela,
Okay.
because that's, we had to even work with the staff to consider what was appropriate, what wasn't appropriate, and recognizing that because of the background of the clients, we had to be careful in that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Saying you're a very special person might be okay, but saying you're a very special person, to me, personalizes it and leaves room for it to become way more than you may have intended. We do not invite to our homes or to a holiday dinner. We certainly don't get into sexual relationships. And we want to be careful not to get into a sexual relationship with a client's family or friend. Why? Back to multi-person vulnerability. We would be at risk of damaging the professional relationship for one, but it could be damaging to the person receiving services, the person's family, or intimate social network. It could damage our profession, our professional life, the profession as a whole, and even have an impact on the community and the organization that we work for. Giving out the cell phone number, personal cell. No, we shouldn't. And maybe you have a cell phone that's a work number, and in this day of technology, that may be appropriate, but not a personal cell. Using drug culture slang. Let's talk about that. How might that be helpful or harmful?
I don't think I would use it. I would want to know it, learn it so I would understand it if I heard it. Now I've done that. If I don't know, if I hear it being used, I would ask someone what it meant. So if I hear it, I would want to know what my clients are saying so I would know the slang.
Okay.
but using it, no.
Okay. All right. All right. So we want to get to know what it means. We want them to
Yes.
educate us, but we
Right.
don't want to. I think it can be embarrassing almost to use their language the way they use their language. Same with profanity.
No.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Intimate self-disclosure. We talked about that. If you're in a valley, don't share it. I'm going through a divorce, through a rough divorce. If you're in the midst of going through it, don't share it.
No.
Addressing client by the first name. Well, it depends on your agency's policy, but then you still can make a preference that even if it's the agency's policy to use first names, you can choose to have the client use your last name if that's more comfortable for you. I think that it keeps the relationship in perspective.
Yeah, Pam, I would like to, can I, for a moment, go back to number 13?
Yes.
Yeah, at my job, I was a group facilitator where I ran a group and I had mostly men in the group.
Okay.
And I was told that, you know, one of the things my supervisor always kind of elaborated on was that you have to meet the client where they are, which I, you know, agree with that to a certain extent.
Yeah.
However, with men, the profanity became terrible in the group. And there were times that the way I handled it, I wouldn't speak out against it publicly to everyone, but the initiator of it, I would have to pull them aside after group and maybe talk with them about toning it down.
Yeah.
Because once one person started with the profanity, it was just awful. And I felt very uncomfortable dealing in that atmosphere, but because the supervisor wanted me to, you know, meet them where they are, which I didn't quite, I understood what that meant, but I didn't, you know, because she was in there in the group I was.
Yeah.
So how I handled it, I would pull the initiator of it, and usually once that head ringleader, you kind of got their attention,
Uh-huh.
and they would start off the ball talking in a better mannerism, which they can do that, but they just, you know, pick that up. It didn't go like that. So that's how I had to do it because I became uncomfortable. They weren't uncomfortable, but some of the stuff, they, you know, the way they was just going, it was very uncomfortable for me.
And so when you addressed it, was it hard for you to address it?
No, it wasn't. No, and I did it very tactfully. I you know, just that person and I privately.
Okay.
You know, I asked him to stay after group for a few minutes. I'd like to speak with him. And I did it in a very respectful way. And he didn't think that I was being power over him or anything, you know, and we talked and he agreed with me, you know, and he apologized. So it went well. And then eventually you know, eventually as I got comfortable with the group and was there a while, when new people would come in, if somebody did cuss, the group started saying, "Oh, no cussing in Miss Lewis."
That's right.
In the group room. So I didn't have to say anything.
That's how it was. Yeah, that's how it was with the juveniles at the detention facility. Once you establish, you know, your ground, then it passes on from group to group because there's always somebody from the last group in the new group, and so they'll fight for you. You know, they'll stand up for you. Yeah.
Do you think? But another question. I didn't know if I was maybe being too much as far as me being offended. You know, how do you know?
I think that you have to separate the offense. You took it personal, and that's one of the things we talked about in our thinking. We don't want to personalize, and so what I did was I realized that we have generations now who have been desensitized from being respectful.
Okay.
Back
Yeah.
in the 60s, man, I mean, you know, a kid growing up, I cussed, but I ain't cuss around grown folks, you know.
Mhm.
But that's been lost in many of our
Right.
cultures and
Yeah.
society. That's been lost. And so realizing that when I deal with adolescents and grown people who don't automatically assume, people automatically assume everybody cuss. People automatically
Yeah.
assume that everybody is comfortable with that. And I used to be, but I've changed my life. And I think that I realized that it's healthy to try to help people to be able to have conversation and not you have to use profanity, because when they get work, when they get jobs, when they get out in
Right.
society, and so we're mentoring as we counsel. And so I think that, yeah, when you look at that, you took it personal, that's something you need to investigate and deal with concerning you, you know, and why you took that personal, because it wasn't a direct offense against you.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was
Towards
a
me.
normal lifestyle for them, you know.
Right. Yeah. And I realized that maybe I shouldn't use the word personal. I knew it wasn't that. It was just, it just became the norm in my group, you know, loud, boisterous, and every second word was a cuss word. And the atmosphere just began to get out of control,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, with
yeah.
that. Yeah. So that's why I felt I needed to. And then I think when the ladies started coming in the group, you know, they took it to another level.
Descriptive cussing. No.
Yes, yes. So you know, I knew who I was dealing with, the population, and I knew they, you know, we did that because I've been out there, you know.
Right,
But I
right.
think in a group setting, like you said, like I said, you know, you're gonna go find jobs, and you're gonna have to learn how to express yourself in a different way, you know. So my concern was to try to get them to look at how they sound, and how, you know, this is not where you want to stay. You want to
Yeah,
move up
absolutely.
higher.
If you want to change, because they've been in the street. And so
Yes.
now you're
Yes.
moving toward having to become a productive member of society, and being able, Tassie put in the chat, sentence enhancers. They need new sentence enhancers. That's good. Okay, I'm
Yes.
going to step away for just a second, but I want you guys to look at something and tell me in the chat what you think this is.
Hmm.
A dog? You thinking that's a dog?
Ooh.
Is that a dog? I don't know. I don't know. Is that a dog?
That's it.
Look like a dog.
Well, I guess if you want to say it's a dog, okay.
I don't know. Dog, I'm not sure. Is it a dog? But I'm not sure about the head. Is it a dog? I'm saying a dog, but I'm not sure.
I have
I'll
no
put a
idea
question
what
mark.
that is.
I'll put a question mark by it because I'm not sure.
Well, it could be a dog. Remember, we're not dealing with professionals.
Because I'm looking at the head and I can't tell. The head
Yeah,
is
I think it might be a dog.
bone. I don't.
See what I got here.
I said a dog bone. That's what I started to put a dog bone.
Wow. Who said a heart valve? uh, okay. All right. Well, yeah, Mary, it is definitely an animal.
Oh, I didn't know what type. I didn't know what type, but it does look like an animal.
Tassie, I want to know what kind of heart valve you. That is funny. A heart
Quite
valve.
honestly, I don't have an idea in the world, but that was the first thought that came to my mind, is that was like a part of a heart or something.
Wow. Okay. It's a dog. It's a dog.
Okay.
And it's actually so you're in a session with a client and they make an animal and you look at it and you can see, it's like you're impressed that they were able to make something out of Play-Doh that's identifiable. And so you say, oh, look at there, you got a dog. That is so nice. So you like dogs? And the client is like, no, I hate dogs. You know what I'm saying? And so, and for me, I made the dog because I've only had one dog in my life that I really liked. I got some sad stories, but, and when I went on a trip with my grandmother to California, when I got back there, it took my dog to the dog pound. And so, if I were a client, and I made a dog, that would be a story that I would tell that might open up an opportunity or avenue for some conversation that really might get to the root of some things, like rejection issues or abandonment issues, or, but we want to dive into it and ask what, and here's my dog, and ask what it is and why you made it. Any comments?
Good conversation piece.
It is, I'm telling you, that Play-Doh can open up for some opportunities in treatment to talk about some things, to point to some issues that are underlying issues to the drug addiction. Mm-hmm. So let's see, let's finish this. So we talked about the first name, number 16, attending an event given by a third party and the client is attending also. Well, if you didn't know that the client was attending and you get there and the client is there, you could leave, or you could just not let your hair all the way down. And just realize that you might have to change your behavior because the client is there. You certainly don't interact with the client. Hire client after treatment to do work for you. No. Attending client's special occasion. Well, how many of you have attended graduations?
Yeah.
Yeah. Accomplishments. Uh-oh. I gotta try to get out of here. Did I hear somebody say that you've attended graduations?
Yes.
I have attended special occasion for a client, like a graduation.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is make sure that it's sanctioned by the agency you work for.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, moving right along. Boundary crossing, and we're almost done. Boundary crossing equals boundary violation. When we cross boundaries, We depart from commonly accepted practices that could potentially benefit clients, which lead to boundary violation, a serious breach or break an agreement that results in harm to clients, harm to the agency, harm to the professional, and to the profession, but especially leads to burnout. So those boundaries, maintaining boundaries can save your life. Signs and symptoms of burnout: physical, mental, and emotional response to a constant level of high stress is what burnout is. It's a psychological term to describe the experience of long-term exhaustion and diminished interest, and is common among human service workers. It's characterized by relentless strain on the mind and body, emotional and physical fatigue, feelings of hopelessness, powerlessness, resentment, and failure, stagnation and reduced productivity, and levels of depression or unhappiness that eventually threaten you and your relationships and your health. And we're talking relationships, not just work relationships. We're talking about threatening our personal relationships as well. So 8 principles for maintaining boundaries. We want to empower our clients, not rescue them. And John, you shared that story about, you know, the client who had the accident, and you know, your heart desire was to fix it for him, to rescue, to help him out, but you empowered him, and especially by not showing up, and not saving him or rescuing him. We want to empower them with tools to live with, so that after they're out of our care, they can still function and not become dependent on us. We want to take care of ourselves. Again, put the mask on yourself first. Remember, service time is not me time. So we don't want to get into self-disclosure that will cause us to spend so much time talking about us that it takes time away from the service time that they should be receiving. Don't open your wallet. You open it once, you gotta open it again.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe for several other clients, once they found out you opened it for one. Don't shift from service provider to employer. And we talked about that in the last slide or two, where you don't want to hire, it's a don't hire a client to do work for you after treatment or during treatment. Be consistent. You may be the only constant in their lives. You may be the first person that is true to their word. And so you want to be consistent, and you don't want your yes to be no. Your no to be eventual yes, maybe later, but being consistent, being firm, being that role model. We're role models whether we want to be or not. And then being accountable, so that even if, consistent in that if the session is canceled, let it be on the part of the client and not your part, if at all possible. Being accountable is kind of part of the self-care. In fact, it is taking care of yourself. Part of that is being accountable to someone outside of your work environment, but who has an understanding of what you do for a living, and somebody you can debrief with, somebody that you can vent to, and somebody that you can hold yourself accountable to, that will hold you accountable for your actions and won't co-sign unhealthy behaviors. And we are done. So now, let me end the video.